The howl of the wind through Rattlesnake Canyon carried more than just dust and tumbleweeds. On that scorching afternoon in 1878, it carried the unmistakable wail of an infant. Luke Vasquez reined in his stallion, Midnight, and tilted his head, his hand instinctively reaching for the Colt revolver at his hip. In his 15 years riding the dangerous territories of the Arizona desert, he'd learned that unusual sounds often meant trouble. "You hear that, boy?" Luke whispered to his horse, whose ears had perked forward. The cry came again, desperate and thin, nearly lost in the vastness of the canyon. "Someone's out there." Luke nudged Midnight forward, following the sound that seemed to echo off the red rock walls. The canyon was notorious for flash floods and ambushes. Neither outlaws nor Apache warriors were uncommon in these parts. But a baby's cry, that was something different altogether. As he rounded a bend in the narrow path, Luke spotted movement below a flutter of fabric against the rusty landscape. He dismounted quickly, tethering Midnight to a scraggly mesquite tree, and proceeded on foot, moving with the quiet precision that had kept him alive in a land where death came easily. The crying grew louder as he approached, and then he saw her, a woman huddled against the canyon wall, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her dress was torn and dirty, her dark hair tangled with dust and small twigs. Blood had dried on her temple, and her eyes were wild with exhaustion and fear. When she spotted him, she tried to scramble away, pressing herself deeper into a small alcove in the rock face. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse but determined. Luke raised both hands, showing her they were empty. "Madam, I mean no harm," heard the little one crying. "You both look like you could use some help." The baby continued to wail, and Luke could see the woman was trembling, either from fear or exhaustion, probably both. Her arms tightened protectively around the infant. "I've got nowhere to go," she whispered, and Luke could see tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. He took a cautious step forward. "I've got you," he said softly. "Both of you, my name's Luke Vasquez. I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Water, food, shelter, it's all yours if you want it." For a long moment, the woman just stared at him, weighing his words against whatever danger had driven her into the canyon with a baby. The infant's cries had softened to whimpers. "Bella," she finally said. "Bella Reed." "And this is my daughter, Sarah." She hesitated. "Someone's after us." Luke nodded, not pressing for details. "Can you walk? My horse is just up the path." Bella tried to stand but stumbled immediately. Luke moved forward and gently helped her up with one strong arm, careful not to crowd her or the baby. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "You're safe now," Luke assured her, though in the untamed West, safety was never guaranteed. Still, he meant what he said next. "I'll make sure of it." As they made their way back to Midnight, Luke kept one hand near his revolver and his eyes scanning the canyon rim. Whoever was after Bella and her child might still be out there, and Luke Vasquez had just made their problems his own. Midnight nickered softly as they approached. The black stallion was a steady mount, but Luke knew the horse would need to carry double weight back to the ranch. "We'll need to ride together," Luke explained. "The little one between us, can you manage that?" Bella nodded, clutching Sarah closer to her chest. The baby had quieted now, perhaps soothed by her mother's heartbeat or simply exhausted from crying. Luke helped Bella onto the saddle first, then mounted behind her, creating a protective cage with his body. He was acutely aware of her scent, a mixture of dust, sweat, and something floral that had somehow survived her ordeal. It had been a long time since he'd been this close to a woman. "Hold on tight," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. As they set off at a steady pace, he felt her gradually relax against him, though she never loosened her hold on little Sarah. The journey back to the ranch was slow and tense. Luke chose the safest path, avoiding open spaces where they might be spotted from a distance. The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, but the beauty was lost on him as he focused on getting his unexpected charges home safely. "Who's after you?" he finally asked as they crossed a dry riverbed. Bella was silent for so long that Luke thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was barely audible over the rhythm of Midnight's hooves. "My husband's brother," she said. "Franklin Reed, he killed Thomas, my husband, 3 days ago, wants the deed to our land. It's worth something now that the railroad's coming through." Luke felt her shudder against him. And the baby, Sarah, is just 6 months old. Franklin, he said there'd be no witnesses, that no one would question if we both disappeared out here. Luke's jaw tightened. He'd seen men kill for less in these territories, but threatening an infant crossed a line that stirred a cold fury in him. "You're both safe with me," he repeated. "My ranch isn't much, but it's defensible, and I've got two good hands who work for me, men I trust." As they crested the final ridge, Luke's property came into view in the valley below. The main house was modest but sturdy, with a barn, corral, and bunkhouse arranged nearby. Smoke curled from the chimney, indicating that his foreman, Henry, had already started supper. "It's not much," Luke said, suddenly self-conscious about the simple spread. "It looks like heaven to me," Bella whispered, and Luke felt something stir in his chest at her words. As they approached the house, the front door opened and Henry stepped out, rifle at the ready. The older man relaxed when he recognized Luke but raised an eyebrow at the sight of Bella and the baby. "Henry," Luke called out, "we've got guests. This is Miss Bella Reed and her daughter Sarah. They'll be staying with us for a while." Henry, a weathered man in his 50s with a gray mustache that drooped past his chin, tipped his hat. "Madam, little one, welcome to Vasquez Ranch." Luke dismounted first, then carefully helped Bella down. He could see now in the failing light just how exhausted she truly was. Her legs buckled as soon as her feet touched the ground, and Luke caught her and the baby in one swift motion. "I've got you," he said again, and this time he lifted her completely in his arms, the baby secure between them. "Henry, get the spare room ready," Luke instructed as he carried Bella toward the house. "And send Miguel to town first thing tomorrow for supplies, baby things, and keep your eyes open. We might have trouble coming our way." Henry nodded, asking no questions. In the West, a man's business was his own until he chose to share it. Inside, the house was simple but clean, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Luke carried Bella to the small bedroom off the kitchen that he used for the occasional visitor. The bed was narrow but fresh, and he laid her down gently. "You're safe here," he said for the third time that day, finding he needed to reassure himself as much as her. "Rest now, I'll bring you some food and water." Bella looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "Why are you helping us? You don't know me." Luke paused in the doorway, considering her question. "Out here we help folks in need, it's how we survive." He hesitated, then added more softly, "And no child should be in danger, not while I can do something about it." As he turned to leave, Bella's voice stopped him again. "Mr. Vasquez?" "Luke," he corrected gently. "Luke," she repeated, the sound of his name on her lips oddly pleasing to him. "Thank you for saying you've got us. I believe you." Something about her trust, given so hesitantly after whatever horrors she'd endured, touched him deeply. Luke nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and went to prepare food for the woman who had appeared in his life like a dust devil, sudden, unexpected, and with the power to change everything in her path. In the kitchen, Henry was already heating up the bean stew that had been simmering all day. The older man gave Luke a questioning look but waited for him to speak first. "Her husband was murdered," Luke explained in a low voice, mindful that sound carried in the small house. "Brother-in-law wants their land, threatened the baby too," Henry cursed under his breath. "What's your plan?" Luke ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly aware of how complicated his simple life had just become. "Keep them safe until we figure something out. The woman can barely stand, Henry, and that baby." The older man nodded, ladling stew into a bowl. "Miguel and I will take turns keeping watch." "This brother-in-law, you think he followed her?" "I don't know," Luke admitted. "But I'm not taking chances. Double the night watch and make sure the rifles are loaded." Henry added a chunk of cornbread to the plate. "You're a good man, Luke. Your father would be proud." Luke took the food without responding. His father had been dead for 7 years, killed by Apache raiders before Luke had managed to establish the ranch as anything more than a struggling outpost. Mentions of parental pride always left him uncomfortable. When Luke returned to the bedroom, he found Bella sitting up, nursing the baby beneath a thin blanket. He hesitated in the doorway, not wanting to intrude on the intimate moment. "I can come back," he offered. Bella shook her head. "It's all right, she's nearly done." Her voice was stronger now, though exhaustion still lined her face. Luke set the food on the small table beside the bed and stood awkwardly, unsure whether to stay or go. He found himself studying Bella more carefully now. Despite the dirt and trauma, she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and large brown eyes that seemed to hold both strength and sorrow. "How old are you, Miss Reed?" he asked suddenly, then immediately regretted the personal question. A small smile touched her lips. 22, and it's Mrs. Reed, though I suppose I'm a widow now." The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "Thomas and I were married just over a year ago. Sarah came along quickly after." "I'm sorry for your loss," Luke said, the words inadequate but sincere. Bella adjusted the baby and her blanket. "And you, Mr. Vasquez, how long have you been out here alone?" Luke leaned against the doorframe. "I'm 31, been on this land since I was 16 when my father staked the claim, been running it alone since I was 24. "No wife?" Bella asked, then blushed slightly. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." Luke shook his head. "No wife. Not much opportunity for courting when you're trying to keep a ranch afloat in Apache territory." Sarah had finished nursing, and Bella adjusted her dress before shifting the baby to her shoulder, patting the tiny back gently. The domestic scene stirred something in Luke, a longing he usually kept buried beneath the daily demands of ranch life. "You should eat," he said, nodding toward the food, "and then rest. We can talk more in the morning about what to do next." Bella nodded, and as Luke turned to leave again, the baby let out a small burp that made both adults smile despite the gravity of the situation. "Good night, Mrs. Reed," Luke said formally. "Bella," she corrected, echoing his earlier words. "Please call me Bella," Luke nodded. "Good night, Bella." "Sleep well." Outside the room, Luke leaned against the wall for a moment, taking a deep breath. The day had certainly not gone as he'd expected when he'd ridden out to check the southern boundary of his property. Now he had a widow, a baby, and potentially an armed murderer to deal with. Henry approached from the kitchen, keeping his voice low. "Miguel's taking first watch, I've got second. You should get some rest too," Luke nodded. "Wake me if anything seems off, anything at all." As he headed to his own bedroom, Luke found himself listening for any sound from his guests. The baby was quiet now, and he hoped Bella was eating the food he'd brought. Tomorrow they would need to make plans. If Franklin Reed was indeed tracking his sister-in-law, it was only a matter of time before he found his way to the ranch, and when he did, Luke Vasquez would be ready. The first light of dawn was just breaking over the eastern hills when Luke awoke with a start. He sat up, instantly alert, his hand reaching for the revolver he kept beside his bed. Something had disturbed his sleep, a sound out of place in the familiar rhythm of his ranch. He dressed quickly and moved silently through the house. Pausing at the door to Bella's room, he listened carefully. Soft, even breathing told him both mother and child were still asleep. Good. They needed the rest. Outside, the early morning air was cool, with the promise of another scorching day to come. Luke spotted Miguel at his post near the corral, the young Mexican hand scanning the horizon with vigilant eyes. Nothing seemed amiss, yet Luke couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had awakened him. "Anything?" he asked as he approached Miguel. The younger man shook his head. "Quiet all night, patron, not even a coyote." That was unusual in itself. The desert was never truly silent. "Stay sharp," Luke instructed. "I'm going to check the North Ridge." He saddled midnight quickly, the familiar routine calming his nerves somewhat. As he rode out, Luke took one last look at the house where Bella and Sarah slept. He had known them less than a day, yet already he felt responsible for their safety in a way that went beyond simple Western hospitality. The North Ridge offered a clear view of the surrounding territory. Luke dismounted and used his spyglass to scan the horizon systematically. Nothing, and then a flicker of movement in the distance. A rider, maybe two, moving with purpose toward his ranch. Luke's jaw tightened. It could be innocent travelers, but his instincts told him otherwise. He mounted midnight and rode back to the ranch at a gallop. Henry was awake and tending the fire when Luke burst through the door. "Riders coming from the north," Luke announced. "Two, maybe more. Get the rifles ready." Henry nodded and moved to the gun cabinet without question. Luke went to Bella's room and knocked softly. When there was no answer, he opened the door slightly. Bella was awake, sitting in the room's single chair with Sarah in her arms. She looked up at him with immediate concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Riders approaching," Luke said, seeing no point in sugarcoating the situation. "Could be nothing, but we're taking precautions." Bella stood, clutching Sarah tighter. "It's Franklin, I know it is, he won't stop until he finds me." "Listen to me," Luke said, stepping closer. "I need you to take Sarah to the root cellar. There's a trapdoor in the pantry. It's not comfortable, but it's safe, and there's a way out that leads to the creek if needed." "I won't leave you to face him alone," Bella protested. Luke was struck by her courage even as he shook his head firmly. "Your job is to protect Sarah. My job is to protect you both. Please, Bella." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she nodded reluctantly. "What will you do?" Luke's hand rested on his revolver. "First, I'll try talking. Most men can be reasoned with." "Not Franklin," Bella said quietly. There's something wrong with him, Luke, always has been. Thomas tried to help him for years, but—" She trailed off, her eyes distant with painful memories. Luke gently touched her shoulder, bringing her focus back to him. "I understand, but I need you to trust me. Henry and Miguel are good men in a fight, and I've been handling my own troubles since before the war." Bella searched his face, then nodded again. "I trust you, Luke." "I don't know why, but I do." The sincerity in her voice warmed him even as the gravity of their situation pressed down. "Good, now go, I'll come for you when it's safe." Luke escorted Bella to the pantry and showed her the hidden trapdoor, helping her down the narrow ladder while she balanced Sarah carefully. "Stay quiet," he instructed. "No matter what you hear." Bella reached up and caught his hand. "Be careful," she whispered, and there was something in her eyes that made Luke's heart beat faster. "I will," he promised, then closed the trapdoor and covered it with the small rug that normally sat there. By the time he returned to the main room, Henry had the rifles ready, and Miguel had joined them from his watch post. "2 riders," Miguel reported. "One older, one younger, both armed." "Franklin would be the younger one," Luke said. "The older might be his foreman, Willis." Bella mentioned him once. The 3 men positioned themselves strategically, Henry by the window with a clear shot of the approaching riders, Miguel at the back door in case they tried to circle around, and Luke standing openly on the front porch, his posture relaxed but his hand near his revolver. The riders approached slowly, their horses kicking up dust in the morning light. Luke could see them clearly now, a man in his late 20s, with a neat beard and expensive clothes that marked him as no ordinary cowhand. And beside him, an older man with a face like tanned leather and eyes that missed nothing. "That's far enough," Luke called out when they were about 30 yards from the house. The riders stopped, and the younger man, Franklin Reed, Luke presumed studied the ranch with cold calculation. "Morning," Franklin called back, his voice pleasant enough but with an undercurrent of menace. "Pardon the intrusion, but I'm looking for my sister-in-law. Delicate thing traveling with an infant. She's not well, I'm afraid. Family's concerned." Luke kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen any women or children out this way, just me and my hands." Franklin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's strange, because we've been tracking her and the trail leads right to your property." "Lots of travelers pass through," Luke replied. "I can't account for every set of tracks." The older man leaned over and muttered something to Franklin, whose face darkened momentarily before the smile returned, broader but even less genuine. "Mind if we look around? For our peace of mind." Luke shifted his weight slightly, a casual movement that nonetheless placed him in a better position to draw if needed. "I do mind, actually. This is private property." Franklin's smile faded completely. "Listen, Cowboy, that woman has something that belongs to me, a piece of paper. I want it back." "And I said there's no woman here," Luke repeated, his voice hardening. "Now, I've been hospitable, but my patience has limits. I suggest you move along." The tension stretched between them like an over-tightened guitar string. Luke was acutely aware of Henry at the window, rifle aimed and ready, and of Miguel covering the rear. But he was also aware of Bella and little Sarah hiding below, depending on him. Franklin's hand moved toward his gun, but the older man grabbed his wrist, stopping him. "Think, boy," the older man growled. "3 of them, 2 of us, bad odds." For a moment, Luke thought Franklin would ignore the advice, but then the younger man relaxed, though his eyes remained cold with promise. "We'll be back," Franklin said, "with more men. And then we'll see how hospitable you feel." Luke said nothing, maintaining his stance as the 2 men turned their horses and rode away. Only when they were well out of sight did he allow himself to exhale fully. Henry emerged from the house, rifle still ready. "They'll be back," he echoed Franklin's words. Yes, Luke agreed, but we'll be ready. He turned to Miguel. Ride to town, get Sheriff Dawson if he's sober, and if not, try to round up a few men we can trust. Tell them there's good pay for a few days' work. As Miguel hurried to saddle his horse, Luke returned to the pantry and removed the rug. Opening the trapdoor, he found Bella sitting on the dirt floor of the root cellar, Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms despite the cramped, dusty conditions. It was him, wasn't it? Bella asked as Luke helped her up. Luke nodded. Yes, but he's gone for now. We've bought some time. Once they were back in the kitchen, Bella paced while Luke explained what had happened. He'll bring more men, she said, echoing Franklin's threat. He has money for hired guns. So do I, Luke said simply. Not much, but enough, and I have the advantage of knowing this land. Bella stopped pacing and faced him directly. Why are you doing this? You could have just told him I was here, avoided all this trouble. The question caught Luke off guard. Why was he risking everything, his ranch, his life, his men, for a woman he barely knew? The answer came to him with surprising clarity. Because it's the right thing to do, he said. And because when I found you in that canyon, when you looked at me with such fear and hope, I made a promise. I said I've got you, and I meant it. Bella's eyes filled with tears. She shifted Sarah to one arm and reached out with her free hand to touch Luke's face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled cheek. You're a good man, Luke Vasquez, better than most I've known. The touch of her hand sent warmth through him, and Luke found himself leaning slightly into her palm before he caught himself and stepped back. This wasn't the time for such feelings, not with danger approaching. We should prepare, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Franklin said you have something he wants. A paper, Bella nodded, reaching into the small bag she'd kept with her. The deed to our land. Thomas's father left it to him, not to both brothers as Franklin always believed. When the railroad survey came through and offered to buy a right-of-way, Franklin demanded his share. Thomas refused. The money was for Sarah's future. She handed Luke a folded document, worn at the creases from being hidden and carried. The land is worth a small fortune now. $20,000, the railroad man said. Luke let out a low whistle. Men had killed for far less. This is what Franklin is after. Yes, Bella confirmed. He came to our house 3 nights ago demanding Thomas sign over half the property. When Thomas refused again, Franklin shot him. Right in front of me, her voice broke. I was holding Sarah in the next room. I heard everything. Franklin was so angry he didn't immediately think about the deed itself. I grabbed it, took Sarah, and ran. We've been hiding, moving at night ever since. Luke carefully refolded the deed and handed it back to her. We need to get this to a lawyer in town, have it recorded properly in your name as Thomas's widow. But first, we need to deal with Franklin. Henry appeared in the doorway. Miguel's gone to town. Should be back by nightfall, hopefully with help. Luke nodded. Good. In the meantime, we prepare. Bella, is there anything else you can tell us about Franklin? How many men he might bring? What kind of weapons? Bella thought for a moment. He has 4 ranch hands who are loyal to him. Willis, the older man who was with him, is the most dangerous. He was in the war, and Thomas said he killed more men after it than during. Franklin himself is a good shot but tends to act without thinking when he's angry. 5 men then, Luke calculated. If Miguel brings back even 2 or 3, we'll be evenly matched. And if he doesn't, Bella asked softly. Luke met her gaze steadily. Then we do what we must. But I promise you this, Bella Reed, no harm will come to you or Sarah while I'm breathing. The conviction in his voice seemed to reassure her, and she nodded, holding Sarah a little closer. Now, Luke said, you should rest while you can. Tonight might be difficult. But rest proved elusive for all of them as they prepared for the coming confrontation. Luke and his men fortified the ranch as best they could, moving water barrels for cover, checking and rechecking their ammunition, and planning defensive positions. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Luke found Bella sitting on the front porch, watching Sarah play with a small wooden horse that Henry had carved for her. The domestic scene struck Luke forcefully how quickly they had adapted to each other's presence, how natural it felt to have Bella and Sarah there. May I join you? He asked. Bella smiled and moved over on the bench. Of course. Luke sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. Sarah seems to be adjusting well, he observed. Children are resilient, Bella said, and she's too young to understand what's happening. She paused, watching her daughter with a mixture of love and worry. If anything happens to me, Luke, don't, he interrupted. Nothing will happen to you. Bella turned to face him fully. We both know that's not a promise you can keep, so please listen. If anything happens to me, Sarah has an aunt, my sister in California, Laurel Reed. She would take good care of her. Luke wanted to protest again, but recognized the practicality of Bella's concern. I understand, but it won't come to that. They sat in silence for a moment, watching as the sun painted the desert in gold and crimson. It was beautiful and peaceful, a stark contrast to the violence they anticipated. Tell me about your husband, Luke said suddenly, surprising himself with the request. Bella seemed surprised too, but answered readily. Thomas was kind, gentle. He loved books and had dreams of turning our ranch into something special. He wasn't much of a cowboy, truth be told. A small smile touched her lips at some private memory, but he was a good man who wanted to do right by his family. He sounds like someone I would have respected, Luke said sincerely. Bella's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. Yes, you would have gotten along well, I think. She hesitated, then asked, and you never married, but surely there was someone. Luke looked out at the darkening landscape. Once, her name was Catherine. She was the daughter of a man who owned the mercantile in town. We were young, I was 20, she was 18. We had plans. What happened? Bella asked softly. Apache raid, Luke said, the words still difficult even after all these years. Her family was traveling to Tucson. I was going to meet them there, ask her father for her hand properly. They never arrived. He took a deep breath. After that, the ranch became everything, keeping my father's dream alive, honoring his memory and hers. There hasn't been anyone since. Bella's hand found his on the bench between them, her touch light but comforting. I'm sorry, Luke. He turned his hand to grasp hers gently. Life out here is harsh. We endure. Their eyes met, and Luke felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared loss and unexpected connection. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Luke stood quickly, his hand going to his revolver. Inside, he told Bella. Get Sarah and go to the root cellar again. Bella gathered Sarah, who protested at having her play interrupted, and hurried inside. Luke moved to the edge of the porch, relieved to see it was Miguel returning with 3 men he recognized from town. Mr. Vasquez, called one of the men, a tall, raw-boned fellow named Jenkins. Miguel says you've got trouble brewing. Luke nodded, stepping off the porch to greet them. I appreciate you coming, gentlemen. There's pay in it, as Miguel surely told you, but also danger. Another of the men, a former soldier named Decker, spat a stream of tobacco juice. Danger pays better. What's the situation? As Luke explained about Franklin Reed and the likely attack to come, he noticed Henry moving Bella and Sarah back into the house rather than to the cellar. The immediate threat had passed, but night was falling, and with it, the real danger would begin. The men Miguel had brought were experienced fighters, not gunslingers or outlaws, but frontier men who had survived Indian attacks and range wars. They listened carefully to Luke's assessment and contributed their own ideas for defense. They'll come from the north, Decker predicted. That ridge gives cover almost to the house. Luke nodded. 2 men on the roof then, 2 at the front windows and 2 covering the back. Miguel, you know the land best, you and Henry take the roof. Jenkins and Cooper the front. Decker, you're with me at the rear. The men nodded, accepting Luke's authority without question. As they moved to their positions, Luke went inside to check on Bella. He found her in the kitchen, calmly preparing coffee and food for the men. Sarah was asleep in a makeshift bed of blankets nearby. You should be in the cellar, Luke said gently. Bella looked up from her work, her expression resolute. These men are risking their lives for us. The least I can do is make sure they're fed and have hot coffee. Luke wanted to insist, but he recognized the determined set of her jaw. At the first sign of trouble, you take Sarah and go below. No arguments, Bella nodded. No arguments, she agreed, then added softly, Luke, thank you. For everything. He wanted to tell her she didn't need to thank him, that protecting her and Sarah felt as natural as breathing, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply touched her shoulder gently and went to check on the men. The hours stretched long as they waited in the darkness. The ranch was silent except for the occasional creak of the house settling and the soft murmur of the men keeping watch. Luke moved between positions, checking in with each pair of defenders, his senses hyper-alert to any change in the night. It was well past midnight when Henry's low whistle from the roof signaled movement. Luke hurried upstairs, crouching beside the foreman at the small window that overlooked the northern approach. "There," Henry whispered, pointing to shadows moving against the darkness. Luke counted at least 6 distinct figures approaching cautiously, more than they had anticipated but not insurmountable odds. "They're splitting up," Miguel observed from nearby. 3 coming straight for the house, others circling around. Luke nodded. "Just as we expected." "Hold your positions. No one fires until I give the signal or they make a hostile move." He returned downstairs and found Bella waiting in the kitchen, her face pale but composed. "They're here, aren't they?" she asked. "Yes," Luke confirmed. "It's time for you and Sarah to go to the cellar." This time Bella didn't argue. She gathered the sleeping baby and her small bag containing the deed. Luke led her to the pantry and opened the trapdoor. "Whatever happens, stay down there until one of us comes for you, me, Henry, or Miguel. No one else, understand?" Bella nodded, then impulsively leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to Luke's cheek. "Be careful," she whispered, then descended into the darkness below, Sarah still sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. Luke closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug, his cheek still warm from Bella's kiss. He had no time to dwell on the gesture, however, as a voice called out from outside. "Vasquez, we know you've got Bella Reed in there. Send her out with the deed, and no one needs to get hurt." Luke recognized Franklin's voice, now stripped of its earlier false pleasantness. He moved to the front window, staying to the side of the frame. "She's not here, Reed. You're trespassing on private property." A shot rang out, the bullet splintering the window frame inches from Luke's head. He ducked instinctively, though he'd been careful to stay out of the direct line of fire. "That was a warning," Franklin shouted. "The next one won't miss. You've got 1 minute to send her out, or we're coming in shooting." Luke caught Jenkins's eye across the room and nodded slightly. The plan they had discussed was simple: let Franklin's men make the first aggressive move, then respond with coordinated fire to drive them back. If they could wound or capture Franklin himself, the others might lose heart. "1 minute, Vasquez," Franklin called again. Luke remained silent, watching the shadows outside through the damaged window. He could make out 3 figures using the water trough as cover, one of them clearly Franklin by the distinctive hat he wore. The minute passed slowly, each second marked by Luke's steady heartbeat. When it expired, there was a moment of tense silence, then Franklin's voice again, edged with fury. "Your choice, Vasquez. Willis, burn them out." The attack came from multiple directions at once. Gunfire erupted from the front, bullets punching through windows and walls. Simultaneously, a flaming torch arced through the night and landed on the porch roof, the dry wood catching quickly. "Fire!" Luke shouted, and his men responded immediately, returning fire from their defensive positions. The battle was chaotic and fierce. Luke moved between positions, firing carefully when he had a clear shot, coordinating his men's efforts. Through the gunsmoke and shouting, he heard a cry of pain from outside. One of Franklin's men hit. The fire on the porch was spreading, threatening to engulf the entire front of the house. Luke turned to Decker. "Keep firing, I need to deal with that fire." Luke ran to the kitchen and grabbed the water bucket, then moved cautiously toward the front door. Opening it slightly, he tossed the water onto the burning porch roof. It wasn't enough to extinguish the flames completely, but it slowed their progress. A bullet whizzed past his ear, and Luke dove back inside, rolling to a firing position by the window. He spotted the shooter, Willis, the older man, moving between cover toward the side of the house. "Miguel." Luke called up to the roof. "East side." The young hand's rifle cracked twice in quick succession, and Luke heard a grunt and thud as Willis went down. Whether dead or wounded, Luke couldn't tell, but it was one less threat to worry about. The firefight continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Luke's ears rang with the constant gunfire, and the house was filling with smoke from both their own weapons and the smoldering porch. Then suddenly, there was a lull in the shooting. Luke signaled his men to hold their fire, listening intently. "Vasquez." It was Franklin again, his voice tight with fury. "This is your last chance. Send out Bella and the deed, or I swear I'll kill everyone in that house." Luke was about to respond when a new voice cut through the night, a voice that froze his blood. "Franklin, stop this madness." Bella, she was outside. Luke rushed to the window and saw her standing in the yard, Sarah clutched protectively in her arms, the deed held out in her other hand. No, Luke whispered, then shouted, Bella, get back inside. But she remained where she was, her face illuminated by the dying flames on the porch. Enough people have died, Franklin. Here's what you want. Take it and leave us in peace. Franklin emerged from behind the water trough, his gun trained on Bella. Smart girl, finally, he said, advancing slowly. Slide the deed over and back away. Luke's mind raced. How had Bella gotten outside? She must have used the creek exit from the root cellar that he'd mentioned, circling around to appear from the direction Franklin least expected. It was brave, but foolhardy. She'd placed herself directly in danger. Henry, Luke whispered urgently, can you get a clear shot? The foreman shook his head slightly. Too risky with the baby. Luke made a split-second decision. While Franklin's attention was fixed on Bella and the deed, Luke slipped out the back door and circled around the side of the house, moving silently through the shadows. Bella was speaking again, her voice steady despite her perilous position. The deed is yours, Franklin, but you should know I've already sent a letter to the territorial judge explaining everything Thomas's murder, your threats. If anything happens to me or Sarah, they'll know who's responsible. Franklin laughed, an ugly sound without humor. Nice try, Bella, but once I have the deed, it won't matter. Your word against mine, and I've got friends in high places. He was close to her now, reaching for the paper. Luke had worked his way around to a position behind Franklin, moving from shadow to shadow. He could see two of Franklin's remaining men watching from their positions, guns ready. Luke drew his revolver and stepped into the open, his voice cutting through the tense silence. That's far enough, Reed. Franklin spun around, his gun swinging toward Luke, but he was too slow. Luke fired once, the bullet striking Franklin's shoulder, sending him staggering backward with a cry of pain. His gun fell to the dirt. Drop your weapons, Luke called to Franklin's men. It's over. For a moment, it seemed they might continue the fight. Then one of them called out, Franklin's hit. Willis is down, let's get out of here. The sound of retreating horses told Luke that at least some of Franklin's men were fleeing. Franklin himself was on his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face contorted with rage and pain. Bella, get inside, Luke ordered, keeping his gun trained on Franklin. Instead, she moved to Luke's side, still holding Sarah protectively. It's over, Franklin, she said, her voice unexpectedly gentle. Thomas wouldn't have wanted this. Franklin looked up at her, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of hatred and something else, perhaps regret. Thomas was weak, he spat. Always the favorite, always given everything while I had to fight for scraps. That's not true, Bella replied. He loved you, he wanted to help you. Franklin lunged suddenly, not toward Bella but toward his fallen gun. Luke reacted instantly, kicking the weapon away and pressing the barrel of his revolver against Franklin's forehead. Give me a reason, Luke said, his voice low and dangerous. For a tense moment, Franklin seemed to consider his options. Then the fight went out of him and he slumped back to his knees. It's not worth dying for, Franklin, Bella said softly. Not even $20,000. Luke kept his gun steady as Henry and the others emerged from the house, securing the scene. Miguel and Decker went to check on Willis and the other downed man, while Jenkins and Cooper bound Franklin's hands behind his back. Miguel, Luke called, ride for the sheriff. Tell him we've got a confessed murderer in custody. As the young hand mounted up, Luke finally allowed himself to turn to Bella. What were you thinking? He demanded, his relief making his voice harsher than he intended. You could have been killed. Bella met his gaze steadily, Sarah still calm in her arms despite the chaos around them. I couldn't hide in that cellar while you all risked your lives for us. I knew Franklin wanted the deed more than anything, more than revenge, more than me. It was the only way to end this without more bloodshed. Luke wanted to be angry with her for taking such a risk, but he couldn't deny the logic of her actions. Still, the thought of what might have happened made his voice rough with emotion. Don't ever do something like that again. A small smile touched Bella's lips. Are you planning to have me around long enough for there to be an again Mr. Vasquez? The question caught Luke off guard, and he found himself unable to formulate a response. Fortunately, Henry interrupted, approaching with news that Willis was alive but badly wounded and the other man was dead. We should get everyone inside, Luke said, gathering his composure. See to the wounded and wait for the sheriff. The remainder of the night passed in a blur of activity. The fire on the porch was fully extinguished, the wounded tended to as best they could manage, and Franklin secured in the storage room under guard. By dawn, Sheriff Dawson had arrived with deputies to take Franklin and Willis into custody. "You've had quite a night, Vasquez," the sheriff remarked as his men loaded the prisoners into a wagon. "Miss Reed has given her statement. Seems pretty clear-cut Franklin Reed murdered his brother for land and pursued his widow and child with deadly intent. He'll hang for this." Luke nodded tiredly. The adrenaline of the fight had long since worn off, leaving him drained. "What about the deed?" "It's legal and binding," Sheriff Dawson confirmed. "As Thomas Reed's widow, Mrs. Reed inherits everything. The railroad will still want to buy that right-of-way, I expect." "That's for Bella to decide," Luke said. The sheriff gave him a knowing look. "Known her long, have you?" Luke realized with some surprise that it had been less than 2 days since he'd found Bella and Sarah in the canyon. It felt like a lifetime. "Long enough," he answered simply. After the sheriff and his men departed with their prisoners, Luke paid Jenkins, Decker, and Cooper for their help. The 3 men rode off with thanks and the inevitable teasing about Luke's apparent interest in the young widow. The ranch was quiet again, though bearing the scars of the night's battle, bullet holes in the walls, the charred porch roof, bloodstains in the dirt that would soon be washed away by rain or wind. Luke found Bella in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for those who remained himself, Henry, Miguel, and little Sarah, who was playing contentedly with a wooden spoon on the floor. "You didn't have to do that," Luke said, gesturing to the food. Bella looked up with a tired smile. "I wanted to. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for us." Luke sat at the table, watching her move about his kitchen as if she belonged there. "What will you do now?" he asked, the question that had been weighing on him since the sheriff left. Bella paused in her cooking, considering. "I haven't thought that far ahead. The ranch, Thomas's ranch, is mine now, but I don't know the first thing about running it and after what happened." She trailed off, her expression troubled. "You could sell," Luke suggested, though the thought of her leaving created an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. "Take the railroad money and start fresh somewhere else. California, maybe near your sister." Bella turned to face him fully. "Is that what you think I should do?" Luke hesitated. What did he want to say? That in the span of 2 days, she and Sarah had brought more life and purpose to his existence than he'd known in years. That the thought of them leaving made his ranch seem emptier already. "I think," he said carefully, "that you should do whatever brings you and Sarah the most happiness and security." Bella studied him for a long moment. "And if staying here would bring us happiness, not at Thomas's ranch, but here," the question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Luke's heart hammered in his chest. "Bella, she moved closer, setting down the spoon she'd been holding. "When you found us in that canyon, when you said, 'I've got you,' I felt safe for the first time in days. Last night, watching you risk everything to protect us strangers, really I realized something." "What?" Luke asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That sometimes life gives us second chances when we least expect them. Thomas is gone, and I'll always love him as Sarah's father. But I'm still here, still alive, and so are you." Luke stood, closing the distance between them. "Bella, are you saying?" She smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm saying I'd like to stay, Luke, if you want us to." Luke reached out, gently touching her face. "I want that more than I thought possible," he admitted. "But I don't want you to feel obligated because of what happened." "Not obligation," Bella assured him, leaning slightly into his touch. "Connection, understanding, the beginning of something that could grow given time and care." Luke smiled, a weight lifting from his heart. "I'm a patient man," he said, "and this land teaches you to value what matters, to hold it close against the harshness of life out here." "Then we'll stay," Bella said simply, "and see what grows between us." Little Sarah chose that moment to bang her wooden spoon loudly on the floor, making both adults laugh, breaking the intensity of the moment. "She approves, I think," Bella said, bending to pick up her daughter. Luke looked at them together, Bella's graceful strength, Sarah's innocent trust, and felt something settle within him, a certainty he hadn't expected to find again in this lifetime. "Welcome home," he said softly, "both of you." 3 months later, the first snows of winter dusted the mountains surrounding Vasquez Ranch. The property had transformed subtly in that time. Curtains now hung in windows that had been bare for years. A small vegetable garden flourished behind the house, and children's laughter echoed in rooms that had known only silence. Luke stood on the newly rebuilt porch, watching as Bella hung laundry on the line, Sarah crawling nearby on a blanket spread over the autumn grass. The scene filled him with contentment so profound it sometimes caught him off guard. Their relationship had developed slowly, respectfully. Bella had her own room in the house, and Luke had been careful not to rush her, understanding the wounds of grief needed time to heal. But with each passing day, the connection between them deepened, built on shared work, mutual respect, and genuine affection. The railroad money had provided security. Bella had ultimately decided to sell the right-of-way, using part of the funds to improve Vasquez ranch and setting the rest aside for Sarah's future. The painful memories of Thomas's ranch were too strong, and she had sold that property entirely to a family moving west from Kansas. Luke stepped off the porch and walked toward Bella, who smiled as she saw him approach. The smile still made his heart skip, even after these months together. "Henry says the last of the cattle are moved to the south pasture," Luke reported. "Should be good grazing there until the deep snow comes." Bella nodded, pinning a sheet to the line. "Miguel finished reinforcing the barn roof. We should be well prepared for winter." The casual "we" no longer surprised Luke. Bella had integrated herself fully into ranch operations, learning quickly and contributing ideas that had already improved their prospects. The boundary between his life and hers had blurred, then disappeared altogether. Sarah spotted Luke and crawled toward him eagerly, babbling happily. He scooped her up, tossing her gently into the air and catching her, delighting in her peals of laughter. The baby had begun to see him as a constant in her life, reaching for him nearly as often as for her mother. "She adores you," Bella observed, pausing in her work to watch them. "The feeling is mutual," Luke replied, settling Sarah on his hip with practiced ease. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by Sarah's contented noises and the flutter of laundry in the crisp breeze. Luke felt the weight of the small object in his pocket, a simple silver ring he'd purchased on his last trip to town after weeks of consideration. "I thought we might ride to the canyon today," he suggested, trying to keep his voice casual. "The one where we first met." "The view is beautiful this time of year," Bella raised an eyebrow. "All three of us. Henry's wife is visiting. She'd be happy to watch Sarah for a few hours. She mentioned wanting to bake cookies anyway." "That sounds lovely," Bella agreed, hanging the last of the laundry. "Give me a few minutes to change." An hour later, they rode side by side along the trail to Rattlesnake Canyon. Luke on Midnight, Bella on a gentle mare named Penny that Luke had purchased specifically for her. The autumn landscape stretched around them, painted in golds and reds, the mountains sharp and clear against the blue sky. "It's hard to believe it's been only 3 months, Bella mused as they rode. "Sometimes it feels like I've always been here." Luke nodded in understanding. "For me too. The ranch feels more like a home now than it ever did before." They reached the rim of the canyon and dismounted, tethering the horses to a sturdy juniper. Luke led Bella to the edge, where the view opened up dramatically before them, the deep cut of the canyon, the winding silver thread of the creek far below, the distant mesas standing like sentinels against the horizon. "It was down there," Luke said, pointing to a spot along the canyon wall. "I heard Sarah crying, followed the sound and found you." Bella slipped her hand into his. "I was so frightened that day, exhausted, desperate. When I saw you coming, I thought it was the end. And instead, it was a beginning," Luke said softly. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. The moment he'd planned had arrived, and suddenly his carefully rehearsed words seemed inadequate. "Bella," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "when I said I've got you that day, I meant it as a promise of immediate safety. But over these months, it's come to mean so much more." Her eyes were bright as she looked up at him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I want to take care of you and Sarah for the rest of my days," Luke continued. "Not because you need taking care of, you're the strongest woman I've ever known, but because sharing my life with you brings me joy I never thought to find again." Luke reached into his pocket and withdrew the silver ring. It was simple but elegant, with a small turquoise stone set in the band, a nod to the land that had brought them together. "Bella Reed," he said, his heart pounding, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" of making official what already feels true in my heart, that you and Sarah are my family." Bella's free hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling onto her cheeks. For a moment that stretched like eternity, she was silent, and Luke felt a flutter of uncertainty. Then she launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him off balance at the edge of the canyon. "Yes," she whispered against his neck. "Yes, Luke Vasquez, I will marry you." Luke held her tightly, his own eyes damp with emotion. When they finally pulled apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. "It's beautiful," Bella said, admiring the way the turquoise caught the sunlight. "Like you," Luke replied simply. Their kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Luke kept his arms around her, unwilling to let go just yet. "When I found you in this canyon," he murmured, "I had no idea I was finding my future." Bella rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Sometimes the most precious things are discovered in the most unlikely places. They stood together at the edge of Rattlesnake Canyon, where 3 months ago a desperate woman with a baby had met a solitary cowboy with a good heart. The land stretched vast and beautiful around them, harsh yet nurturing, challenging yet rewarding, much like love itself on the frontier. "I've got you," Luke whispered again, his lips against Bella's hair, renewing the promise that had started their journey together. Always. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the range and the sound of wedding bells in the small church in town. Luke and Bella exchanged vows before a gathering of friends and neighbors. Sarah watching solemnly from Henry's wife's arms, dressed in a tiny white dress that matched her mother's. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, a public declaration of the bond that had grown so naturally between them over the winter months. As Luke slipped a gold band alongside the turquoise engagement ring on Bella's finger, he felt a sense of rightness that transcended words. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared, and the small church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. Luke watched in contentment as Bella moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations with grace, Sarah now perched on her hip. His family. The words still filled him with wonder. When they finally returned to the ranch, their ranch now, legally and in every other way that mattered, Luke carried Bella across the threshold in the traditional manner, making her laugh with delight. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vasquez," he said, setting her down gently in the main room that now bore so many touches of her presence. Bella looked up at him, her eyes full of love and promise. "I've been home since the day you found us, Luke. Today just makes it official." They stood together in the quiet house, Sarah already asleep in her room, the future stretching before them like the vast western landscape, challenging at times, but endlessly rewarding for those with the courage to embrace it fully. "I've got you," Luke whispered, drawing his wife close. "And you've got me for all the days to come." And in that moment, in the home they had built together from the foundations of chance and courage, Luke and Bella Vasquez knew that the cry of a baby in a canyon had led them not just to safety, but to the greatest treasure the frontier could offer, a love that would endure through all seasons, as constant and true as the land itself.